Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this webinar. In this webinar, we are going to talk about release management and learn how SaaS release management is still an important event, especially if you have OpenAir, and how it can improve your bottom line by doing release evaluations. This is pretty timely for those of you who do have OpenAir. There's a release this Saturday or tomorrow, so you can take some, hopefully you can take some of these tips home with you and try them out right away. First off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jody Seasai. I'm with Top Step Consulting. And Top Step Consulting is focused on business operations, professional service business operations, and helping you run more effectively with the use of PSA tools. We do have a unique specialization in OpenAir because all of our employees, or most of our employees, actually have come from OpenAir professional services organizations that have used OpenAir. Our company's been in business since 2007, and we have served over 35 clients, many of which are global and national in nature. So at any time, you're welcome to check out our website at www.topstepconsulting.com, and we have a whole slew of offerings under our answers page. So let's go over what we're going to cover in this webinar today. The first thing we're going to talk about is what is release management, the technical definition and how that is defined slightly differently with SaaS. We'll talk about traditional versus SaaS release management and some of the benefits and cost savings between the two models. I'll also go through, and since this is a specific OpenAir discussion, I'll highlight some of the features that OpenAir has introduced even in just the past year that you may not be aware of, and you can take a benefit that you can implement and take benefits away from immediately. And then we'll go through the 5 easy steps to effective release management that hopefully you would be able to apply as early as tomorrow. So let's start by talking about what is release management. And really the definition of release management is just being aware that the vendor is making product changes. And then you have to evaluate those changes for potential implementation or impact on your current environment. You know, one of the things that no matter what type of product upgrade or product release feature comes out, you'll want to make sure that does not have a negative impact in your existing system, whether it's impacting on your process, negative impact on the way you're tracking data, impacting interfaces is always a big concern. And we want to make sure that it actually, any changes that are coming into the product are applicable to your business. Especially in light of maybe some workarounds that you've just simply forgotten are workarounds and they're just part of the daily to-do list. But if you could remove those with some feature releases, that may be a big time savings for you. And with anything, if you introduce change into an environment, you have to make sure that you communicate that change effectively and evaluate if the end user could need some additional training or awareness of what the feature change means in the environment. Now from a SaaS release management model, it's a little harder to recognize release management. And the way that I look at it is it's easy to understand that Windows has gone from XP to Vista to Windows 7, and those are all product releases, product upgrades, almost separate products to some extent. But in SaaS, the product baseline is actually owned by the vendor, and as they enhance the system to make it viable, more efficient, and more attractive to their customer base, you almost overlook release management simply because the features are there, but they don't impact you right away. They don't, it's the whole thing, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Where in some cases it's not broke, but you could do things better. And you also may not be in a position to do release management or know how to take your first steps, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So let's compare traditional and release management steps with SaaS. On the traditional side, there's really two types of release management. There's your product updates, which are the service packs or the patches How many of you have gone to shut down your computer and it's busy installing whatever the next fixes are or features? Or there's full product upgrades. And those usually come with a lot of features or new functionality, maybe even new look and feel. New features typically are available only in the full product upgrade, so you can't just download a patch and suddenly your anytime product works in a different way or has a new drop-down menu in it or something. So you really have to go with full product upgrades, which are a little more extensive than just a single feature activation. Anytime patches or service packs are available, many of you may have your administrators or your IT or departments may have you auto-installing, or they push out fixes to your computer. But those fixes are really that. They're fixes, not necessarily features. And they shouldn't impact the way that you use the product. They should actually help the way you fix the product. But when you want features, you have to do a product upgrade. And really the decision at that point sometimes is not in your control. You may be working with a product and suddenly the vendor comes out and says we're no longer supporting that. I have actually met people who are still on Windows 3, which is not a supported environment, but it's not broke, so they don't bother migrating up because they know it's going to be a little more expensive to do testing and get used to the new products. In the SaaS model, however, there's one code baseline that's owned by the vendor. So decisions as far as how to control or introduce new releases are really the pressure is almost more on the vendor because they have to make sure they take good configuration management care with the baseline, and they introduce the new features within the current product. They handle the configuration control. They have to make sure that whatever they introduce doesn't directly and immediately impact the end users and make the end users have a decision on when they want to take a feature or not. So because of that, vendors are faced with having to do a lot of testing in different ways the system could be configured to make sure that there's no negative impact. And because they have to do all the testing, you get a little more assurance that whenever you do activate a feature, it will work within your configuration. However, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do any testing because, as we said in the previous slide for release management, you want to make sure it's not going to impact or change the way you do business unless it will provide some more efficiency, and then you have to do effective communication of that. So what is a release management cycle, and how do they compare between the two types of models? In a traditional model, if you have to do a major upgrade, there's usually a test environment that's put together by your IT department where they copy or set up a very similar production-like environment, and they do the steps to perform the product upgrade, and then they go through a very extensive test plan usually to make sure the feature functionality and data, are any data migration impacts happening, the talking or the interfaces with the other products that are on older versions, will that still work? And so the testing and the product upgrade exercise may be something that's done in multiple loops until everything is cleared out. Once that testing is complete, then you have to figure out how do you want to introduce this into the production environment. And then the production environment, you also have to plan that very carefully because you'll have to communicate to your end users with how the cutover is going to work, what the impact will be to them, and do they have to take any action, and what will happen if they don't take any action. So the production cutover planning becomes a little more involved, and the communication is a little more involved. And in all of that model, we're talking about potentially extra hardware, teams of people doing evaluations, full test plans, full regression plans, full backout testing in case things don't work right, both in testing environment and the production environment, and then of course final communication and deployment. So you can see why when there's product releases that come out once every couple of years, it's usually a pretty extensive activity within the IT organization to perform a product upgrade with the release cycle. SaaS has to follow the same cycle. However, you'll see that there are some slight differences that are actually big cost savings. One is, creating a test environment. With vendors in a SaaS model, you typically have test environment creation support from the vendor, so you don't really have to take any of your internal resources. They can actually create a test environment for you, and in some cases, especially with OpenAir, it's a very quick action to happen. It could happen within an hour. So that whole step is a very big cost savings compared to the traditional model. As you move into activating new features, it's just that. You don't have to actually define step-by-step of how to perform the product upgrade, like insert the CD and make things run and make sure this gets installed on top of that. It's really a series of switches, and some of those are controlled by yourself, and some of those you just interact with your customer support resources for OpenAir, and they'll activate those features for you. So that step is much shorter simply because it's a couple of checkboxes. Then you have to execute the test plan. Now the test plan is something it's much simpler than the traditional model because you don't have to worry about backouts and actual physical installs, but you do still have to test interfaces, and you do still have to test process, and you do still have to test impact on existing data tracking and make sure that the feature is working as you expect it to work, and it fits nicely or improves the processes that you have and your interfaces are not impacted. So although the execute test plan step is still needed, it's not as challenging as the traditional, but it should still be a full testing window. In some cases, that testing can be done by 1 or 2 people and not an entire team of people. Then you do have to plan production cutover. Now, in some cases, activating new features, the production cutover is simply tomorrow when you come into work, your screen will look different, and this is how you do it, how you work with it. It could be a little more extensive where you've wanted to migrate all of this, maybe contract data, and you've been waiting for features to come available, so you're planning out a window of when the feature will be activated and migrating data to support that feature. In many cases, however, the production cutover planning is simply, okay, well, what night do we want to do this, or what do we want to do it over lunch, and just flip up some switches in the production environment. But the communication, however, is no less important in SaaS than in traditional upgrades. You may not have as many steps or user impacts on the SaaS feature change, but communication is still very important. And here at Top Stepper, we emphasize communication and awareness within the organization of anything you're doing with your SaaS product so that people can understand the changes and understand that there's a continual improvement model within your OpenAir system. So the bottom line is, well, let's go through the costs. And I've actually talked about some of these costs as I was going through the cycles. We have to set up a full test environment, and you may have to actually purchase your product upgrades, things like operating system upgrades or product upgrades. They are really different products, so you may have to purchase those. You do have to do expansive test scenarios, as we talked about in the test window, and then have a coordinated effort for your production cutover activities. So all of that requires sort of a team of people, and that's why it's really only done once or twice. Products only come out every 1 or 2 years, and therefore the upgrades only happen 1 or 2 years. And so during that entire cycle, you're probably pulling people in to try to do some testing, and you may end up losing some productivity and billable hours in that traditional effort, which directly contributes to why the frequency of a traditional release management system upgrade is much less than SaaS. In the SaaS model, email communication is much more important in production and coordination because everyone will still be able to use the system, and the changes can happen real time in the same system. You still have to coordinate all the cutover efforts, but the communication out to the field will make it clear that new features are available, and the end users will see that you're actually improving or continually improving the current code baseline. So minimal coordination, but you do have to make sure that if there's any training, you take that, you bring that to the end users for effective system usage. And ideally, in the SaaS model, there's no loss of billable hours. It's simply On the timesheets, we've added this new column. Please select this new value going forward. And there's not a huge testing activity that goes on. There's no loss of billable hours. Changes to the system can be adopted fairly quickly by your end users. So the bottom line, after these two slides, you probably have a pretty clear idea that SaaS it's still important to do release management, but there is less time and less effort with a SaaS model, which results directly in more efficiency with less cost investment. So, okay, you have a SaaS environment, and it's working just fine to your needs, and you see all these releases, but nothing maybe has been taken advantage of. So what's the impact? What if I never do release management with my SaaS model? Well, stagnant is probably a hard word, but really the system configuration that you started your OpenAir use with is the same from day one. And there have been a number of features, and I'll highlight some that you may not be aware of, that really make your user experience much better, much more effective, and they get information out of the system in a more productive manner. So perhaps you're right now running 3 or 4 reports that you pull together into a spreadsheet, and you run a few macros and VLOOKUPs on them, and then you get your weekly report that you show to management. Maybe there's a feature that came out that actually removes all of that activity and saves you 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week, or saves you a lot of time, and you can run it directly from OpenAir, so you get real-time, actual real-time data, and not data that's 2 or 3 days old. As the system gets older and you're not taking advantage of some time-saving features, maybe some of those processes that you're introducing require too much effort in the system because they're not using or not configuring the system correctly or not taking advantage of future releases. So you get minimal end-user adoption. And you also may miss opportunities where you can reduce redundant data entry, even change your configuration. So where can you get business and IT cost savings by taking advantage of release features? On the business side, you can definitely make your systems more efficient and automate processes more by taking advantage of features that come out every release. And the example of running 3 reports to consolidate into an Excel file, that's probably a workaround. It was called a workaround when you first started using the system, and you just sort of accepted it as day-to-day life. It's still a workaround, so that should always be something that it's a target for removal or streamlining as you continue using the system. Then, of course, anything that you're still doing manually outside the system, a feature may have been introduced that will reduce that manual tracking. Things like leave accrual or leave request to track vacation request and vacation taken. That's been a big feature change to remove the whole need for tracking vacation request sheets, hard copy sheets. From an IT perspective, they're going to look for cost savings that reduce system administration, easier ways to move people between departments, easier ways to change the organization structure on January 1st when everyone makes changes on a fiscal year. And they're really going to want to reduce the number of database calls or streamline their interface code with enhancements that happen to the logic that they can take advantage of with database interfaces. So really, even the release management gives you a cost savings, both direct and indirect, by making business more efficient and getting rid of some of those workarounds that you may have in place. So let's go through some highlights. What you may have missed in the past year. Since January 2007, so I'm going back a couple of years now, OpenAir has completed 12 releases, and that's not including the one tomorrow. So tomorrow will be 13. And each of those releases, some of them are like housekeeping activities. Some are minor changes to existing feature use, like highlighting every other role to make it easier to view data. But some have some extensive feature changes that really provide efficient use and reconfiguration in some cases of the system to really meet the needs of what you need the system to do. And one of my favorites is the Graphical Dashboard. Many people today are probably running the reports from OpenAir, putting them into a spreadsheet, and then converting them into pie charts, line charts, vertical bars, and so forth. I wouldn't say that OpenAir's Graphical Dashboard does everything. It doesn't do three-dimensional mapping, as an example, but it is very robust in handling some of the basic metrics that you need from a professional services organization. And examples are on the screen here with tracking an average bill rate, tracking your forecast, and breaking it down by what stage it is in the pipeline or your sales model. Tracking things of where your services time and where your services revenue is coming from. Other metrics like timesheet compliance, who's consistently late with entering timesheets, how many people still haven't submitted their timesheet. Those are all different metrics that it's nice to see them on a piece of paper, but it's so much easier to interpret exactly what you're trying to look for when it's on a graph. And so the Graphical Dashboard feature is a really nice thing that's come out recently. So what else? I just picked a few that I've talked with many customers about and have them using. Things like accounting period support. Many of you may not be aware. OpenAir, what everyone is aware of is OpenAir is not an accounting system. But what you may not be aware of is OpenAir does support accounting concepts, not just from billing and invoicing, but understanding what an accounting period is. OpenAir itself controls a lot of dates on different objects throughout the system, but with an accounting period support functionality, now you get that extra accounting date, which maps to the fiscal period that information was posted into your accounting system. That saves tons of time for report reconciliation from your finance and accounting people and your project administration team. So if you're not using that feature, that's one that I would suggest you take a look into. On the system control and administration side, the introduction of form permissions and now form rules that give you some Boolean logic, such as if this equals that, hide this field, or if this does not equal that, make this field a required entry. So with form permissions, you can hide fields based on different roles. You can make fields required based on different roles. And really, just this feature alone allows you to have the same exact system look very different depending on the different organizations that may be using it. Things like the research and development or the R&D team may be using OpenAir to put timesheet entries in, but they're not tracking invoices, they're not tracking budget, they're not tracking billing contacts and things like that. So you could hide all those fields from them, and their projects become more related to their R&D structure. Whereas in services, we do need to have who's the contact, what's the budget, and the invoicing activities. And so a services person using the system has a very different view than what an R&D person does, for example. So the form permissions and rules really make it a nice way to customize a system, and there's a time saving for IT as well as the end users, because if you're not using these, there's probably a few fields that people skip over all the time because they know they don't apply to them. So take an opportunity and clean that up. Also, from a system administration perspective, the expansion of the filter sets. If you're not aware of what a filter set is, this is how you can control who sees what data in the system. And until recently, that filter set control had to be hard-coded in some cases in order to really effectively allow people to see the right data. That's been expanded, so things like hierarchies and organizational structures now are part of that filter set and give you an ability to just inherit projects that are part of an organization. A really big time savings and data management savings for your end users, your administrators, as well as your IT department. The Time Entries tab, for those of you who are able to make it to the End User Summit, you may have heard me talking about this Time Entries tab before. I really like this feature. It's a nice, quick lookup way to find out what timesheet had that project time on it. I find myself wondering, what week did Jane Doe work on XYZ company? I go and look in the time entries tab and I can find that really quick and then look up that whole timesheet to see what information I need. It's also very good. It's intended for vendor invoice reconciliation, but just the fact that you can do quick lookups on it from a project, a client, a user, a date perspective, the time entries tab in the timesheets module is a really helpful tool that has you avoid the extra steps of running a report. And as early as last year, the starting support for VSOE reporting has been introduced into OpenAir, specifically from a job role or from a job code perspective. Those of you who are using rate cards or billing may know that the job code indexes into those rate cards for bill-out purposes, but there was always a limitation that you could not change a person's job role in the system if that's what they were acting as on the project. And so those type of support features are now available. Again, huge cost and time savings from a reporting perspective, especially for your finance team and your management team that has to make sure that they're VSOE compliant. And the last feature I'll throw out here, it's a minor change, but it's really something that's been probably bugging a few people before it was available, is approval processes and being able to have someone else approve your timesheet or your expense report other than yourself. Until this feature was available, whenever you were the project manager, you were probably named as the person who had to sign off on timesheets and expense reports. But if you submitted something against the project, it would auto-approve because you would be approving your own thing. And even just a small change of saying, okay, well, if it's yourself as the approver, then it really should be approved by someone else. This now is standard in the OpenAir approval processes, and this alone saves a lot of headache when it comes to having to work around that project manager self-approved problem that was encountered by many customers. So what are the 5 steps to effective release management? First, identify who actually should be doing the release management in your organization. And typically this is a business owner or a business analyst within IT, because they're going to understand the process, they're going to understand why you're using OpenAir and how it's been configured to match that need. They'll understand the reports that you need and what the executive managers are trying to get out of the system. Ideally, that person is also familiar with maybe some help desk tickets or complaints from an end user group, so they can keep an eye out for features that would solve those type of problems. Depending on the structure of your company, you'll probably want an IT owner as well, the person who's responsible for the interfaces that have been built between OpenAir and other systems, and also maybe they're responsible for maintaining just the structure of the system and how the system has been customized altogether. Then you're going to want to evaluate the features that are coming in the release. And this is the hardest part. What's important to you? What should I try out? And the best advice I can give you is, first, make sure that you have a business model for your OpenAir system and your operations. And take those features, because they are still classified by module, and check and see against your business process, is there any overlap? Is there changes to the resource bookings or allocations? Maybe that should be considered if I'm doing resource management. Compare the release notes also with any configuration documents you may have for your OpenAir deployment. And if you don't have those documents, maybe the system administrator, this would be a great time for them to start documenting all that stuff, because now they can compare feature for feature against what's being used in the system and what's not. And then, of course, check that help desk queue for anything that people have asked for or complained about that may actually have been fixed or rectified in the release. And if you find any overlap of any of those, then those are the features that you should look to test. And really, I do support testing as part of release management, because although the feature is advertised to work like X, you really need to make sure it works like X as you expect it in your environment. OpenAir being very configurable means that there's 1,000,001 configurations out there, and you should verify that the feature works in the environment the way that you would expect it to work. So establish a test environment. Get that sandbox from the OpenAir support people so you can play with it. Or, if you want to test things in production, which is really the only place that you can test things that send emails out, you could take advantage of a lot of the filter set features so that you can hide stuff from people while you're doing testing in production. You know, hide project stages or charge stages or things like that. Okay. Once you actually have a test environment, make sure you figure out how you want to test it, why you want to test it, and then document your results. Is anything going to be are the end users going to be impacted at all? If so, how are they impacted? What do they need to know? Okay. Once you've done that testing, you'll define, you'll see, well, what will impact if I switch this switch today? No one may even know that it's happening. And in that case, you could do it at any time, but I like to advocate that you sort of collect a bunch of changes together at the same time and implement it at the same time to be able to keep track of sort of a baseline of what your features are in the system. So establish a paradigm where you're telling the end users, during this time to this time, on this date, we will be doing system maintenance for OpenAir. And in some cases, that may be data migration, it may be system administration, and the new feature application. So don't hesitate to sort of roll other stuff into the feature activation once you've defined what you want to turn on. And the fifth easy step is, and this is a big one in my book, communication. Communication, communication. Okay? People will not adopt change unless you warn them about change. So make sure that you have clear communication out to the field. Proactively push it out to the field. You may not get people actively seeking out a web page for an announcement. If something shows up in their email inbox about changes, they will have a bigger tendency to review it. And when they see that, document what's changed. Why was it changed? What should they do differently? And maybe changes that are hidden behind the scenes you don't need to communicate to them. But everything else, even look and feel. Did this one page, did the name change? Did the color change? Did our logo change? Okay. Talk to your end users and let them know that you're keeping them in the loop and you're listening to their requests along the way. So from that 5 steps of effective management, let me summarize everything that we've talked about so far. The SaaS systems eliminate much of what you would normally pay or invest in to do a product upgrade. With the less effort to do a release management, it translates directly into less cost and less loss of productive time. If you establish a release management owner, that person should be internal to your organization or find a resource that can do it externally for you. And make sure that you you look at the release management as a continual improvement process. If you show proactively that you're acting on end user requests and user complaints, you will get a higher user adoption and more feedback from your end users that you can use as part of your release management methodology. So, all in all, take advantage of release management, take advantage of the releases that come out from OpenAir so that you get the most out of the investment you've made in your OpenAir baseline. Well, thank you very much for joining the webinar. I hope you found this helpful and useful, and I hope you take advantage of things this weekend even with the release from OpenAir. If you would like more information about Top Step Consulting and how we can help you with your OpenAir product, we have business efficiency reviews, we do outsourced administration, and we support release management for customer bases. Please feel free to visit our website at www.topstepconsulting.com or email us at info@topstepconsulting.com. Again, I'm Jody Seaside, and thank you very much for joining the webinar.